What you're looking at now is one of the most primitive and unattractive displays of human 3D creation. Not me, the game! Yes, this is Super Mario 64 before it was Super Mario 64. We can all tell it's really similar to the final product, but it's just slightly off. Except for this weird plastic surgery simulator. That was still a thing.
This is 1995 beta footage of Super Mario 64 showcased at Nintendo Space World in 1995, less than a year before the full game was released. This game is chock full of history, making it one of the most impactful games ever created.
Maybe that's why I have so many videos on it. I swear, this is my last Super Mario 64 video.
The game was extremely successful in many ways, but things weren't all good for the game, including stealing allegations directed towards Nintendo. Somehow this simple-seeming 3D game became filled with legends, rumors, and drama. But before getting into the details, we have to go back to the beginning. The idea of a 3D Mario game was thought of by Shigeru Miyamoto about 5 years before its release, while Miyamoto was working on Star Fox for the SNES. At this time, any existing 3D games were extremely basic and current consoles could only support minimal 3D graphics. But Miyamoto certainly knew of the progressing 3D graphics and wanted to set the standard for the new era of video games. Work on Super Mario 64 began in late 1994, with a team of about only 15 people. They wanted the game to have the same general feel of a 2D Mario game with running and jumping, but just increase the scope. Now that you could go any direction you wanted to, there would be a much bigger emphasis on exploration than just platforming. They wanted to give players a reason to keep playing by filling the world with many magical places with different themes to keep players intrigued. But the most development emphasis was put on how Mario moves and the way he feels, as it was integral to how fun the game was. If Mario felt slow or clunky, nobody would want to keep playing, so the developers spent a lot of time fine-tuning the controls to make Mario fun to move. Miyamoto also emphasized the emotions of different creatures in the world to make it feel more alive, as that was a massive new possibility with improving technology. You can tell how much they stressed emotion by comparing the beta with the actual release and seeing the difference in some of the expressions of the characters. Because Nintendo wanted Super Mario 64 to be a launch title for the N64, the work environment was stressful. Miyamoto's wanting to add more to the game was part of the reason Nintendo decided to delay the N64's release from holidays of 1995 to April of 1996. The final product had 15 stages, although Miyamoto was hoping to get 40 in the game. I can't even imagine a world where we get to have 40 levels in Super Mario 64. The game took less than 2 years to finish developing and was ready for people of all ages to go get their greasy hands on it. Nintendo's marketing strategy for the game was really fascinating and something that I've never heard of before. $20 million was spent on advertising. Some of it was spent on TV advertisements, and some of it was spent on sending videotapes to over 500,000 subscribers of the Nintendo Power magazine. I'm unsure of whether this part of advertising was successful, but you have to give them credit for the creative and probably really expensive idea. Of course, these were the times before YouTube, so companies couldn't entirely rely on online videos to market their games. After another console delay, the game and system came out in June of 1996 in Japan, September in the US, and March of 1997 in Europe. Going into the release, the game had great reviews with a score of 94 on Metacritic. The game was pricey, costing a whole $60, which is about $113 adjusted for inflation at the time of making this video. This was on top of the $200 that had to be spent on the console itself, but 300,000 consoles were sold on day one in Japan. Mario 64 sold over 2 million copies in the first 3 months in North America, so the excitement was through the roof and hopes were high. Upon putting the game into the Nintendo 64 and turning it on, you're greeted with,
"It's me, Mario! Hello!"
This beginning is perfect for the game and it sets the mood for the rest of the game perfectly.
Here's the menu where you can select which save to begin or continue the game with. I don't know if it's the music or something, but this menu still really makes me want to launch into the game to this day.
Okie dokie.
It begins with a letter from Peach telling Mario to meet her in the castle. This follows with a cinematic that takes you on a short tour of the outside of the castle. The scale of the castle is jaw-dropping, with bright colors and beautiful scenery in the surrounding world.
I know this beginning section may seem basic or even annoying to returning players and speedrunners, but you have to remember what this game meant at launch. For many, this was people's first time experiencing 3D graphics, and this short section was enough to dazzle 3D first-timers.
Mario pops out of his iconic green pipe, now giving the player full control of Mario and letting them explore the world they were just shown. This opening area serves as a perfect little playground for the player to test out different controls. You can jump, Double jump, long jump, swim, ground pound into the water, drown yourself again. The possibilities are just endless. Little does the player know that this front area is only the beginning. Entering the front door reveals a grand castle with cheerful wall designs and red carpets. Talking to Toad reveals to Mario that Bowser has stolen the world's stars and has trapped them and the world's creatures in the castle's walls, including Princess Peach. The story gives more of a reason for Mario to actually collect the stars, and that's to save the world from Bowser's evil doing. The first world Mario jumps into is Bob-omb Battlefield, accessed by a painting in the first accessible room. Bob-omb Battlefield is green and joyful, with various helpful and friendly creatures and enemies. As you explore the world, the size and vastness of the world really hits you. There's a giant chain chomp, Goombas, a floating island, secrets, a massive mound. There's just so much to explore, and it's only the first world. The first star is defeating the big bomb at the top of the mound. Each level has 6 stars plus another star for collecting 100 coins. Every time a player collects a star, Mario is kicked out of the painting and must jump back in to continue collecting more. This is a slightly odd decision, and it may have been made to make the game feel a little longer. As a player continues throughout the game, they get a better feel of the game's movement and mechanics. This is also around where players come to realize that the game's camera sucks. Obviously it's good for its time, but that's about as much props as I'm willing to give it. The main problem is when you try to get the camera to change angles, sometimes the camera won't move because it can't go through objects, so it'll result in you jumping around when you can't really see what you're doing.
There's another problem too, the controller. It's pretty self-explanatory because it looks like they told a 3-year-old to design a controller for a 3-armed goblin. Instead of making the D-pad and the joystick reachable from the same handle, they instead just decided to make an entirely new handle for the joystick. Plus the joystick sucks. I mean, at least the controller's iconic, I guess.
After Bob-omb Battlefield, the wonder certainly isn't over. Mario 64 puts real magic in exploring the whole world. The vast reach of different types of feels and styles, from happy and energetic to slow and nostalgic, is massive and still makes you want to play more to this day. From the stress-inducing Bowser fights to the complete relaxation of Jolly Roger Bay, there's so many different moods this game utilizes so well and does a better job at this than most recent Mario games in my opinion. This obviously wouldn't be the case if it weren't for the expertly done music either. I think most people don't realize how fascinating the music making process was on older consoles. Storage space was minimal on cartridges, so they weren't large enough to hold audio files for every song. Instead, there was a library of sounds which the composer, Koji Kondo, could tell the system to use at specific times in the song. So basically, instead of storing an entire file for a song, there would be code that told what sound to use, what pitch, etc. Storing the sounds and code for the game music allowed for there still to be music with minimal storage. I wouldn't even say the music took a hit because of these limitations. I actually think it might be better because of it. This is one of those cases where limitation breeds creativity. Some people look at limits and think it hinders work, when in reality people think of ways to get around it and wind up making something amazing that they couldn't do if those limits didn't exist. Just listening to Dire Dire Docks is enough to rest my case. It goes perfectly with the style of the game and with the Jolly Roger Bay stage. Some of the music was used for several stages and still managed to fit, like how Shifting Sandland and Lethal Lava Pit share a song, but it fits for both. Continuing in Mario's adventure, he traverses the castle, finding stages all over the place, including this sketchy dungeon underneath the castle. He travels through the 15 worlds of all kinds, some bright, some dim, some frigid, some hot. My favorite is Big Boo's Haunt, which is accessed inside of a ghost in the legendary back courtyard. The haunted house's creepiness is done super well, with a major lack of life, only with weird enemies like this eye creature and this piano with teeth. The game is filled with lots of creepy things, but that's for another video.
You said this would be your last video on Mario 64.
Your Honor, I was only joking. It's already a video on my channel, I promise.
Tell it to the judge.
I just did.
I hereby sentence you to 5 years in Bowser in the Sky.
No! Oh, this is actually where I wanted to go. Nice!
Once Mario has collected 70 of the 120 total stars, he's ready to fight Bowser for the third and final time. The lead up to the fight is very intense, with obstacles that are very easy to fall off of. The final Bowser fight is similar to the others, where you have to throw him into the explosive balls. The map falls apart the more the fight continues, and when Bowser is defeated, the final star appears. Collecting the star lets Mario fly away to the outside of the castle, where Peach appears. She gives him a thank you kiss and the game ends happily ever after. This concludes the game's story, but certainly not the game's legendary legacy. So far, the game's legacy seems only perfect. But what's a great legacy without a little drama? I'm referring to Nintendo's problematic relationship with game developer Argonaut. According to an interview with Argonaut's founder Jez San, he first got to meet with Nintendo after he was able to get around the Game Boy's copyright system and had an impressive proof of concept of a 3D game on the Game Boy. This led to them getting a partnership with Nintendo in developing Star Fox. Argonaut's work tremendously helped Nintendo in the advancement of 3D games technology. The relationship between Argonaut and Nintendo collapsed when Argonaut presented an idea for a 3D platforming game using Yoshi. Nintendo is very picky about letting other people use their characters, so the partnership was lost. Nintendo also cancelled Star Fox 2 when it was nearly complete, and it wouldn't release until the SNES Classic released in 2017, so the relationship between the companies ended sourly. After Super Mario 64 was released, Miyamoto thanked the founder of Argonaut for the idea of a 3D platformer. It's possible that Nintendo had already thought of the idea of a 3D platformer and Miyamoto was just trying to console them, but it's likely that Nintendo got rid of Argonaut, used their idea, and released a 3D platformer before Argonaut could release theirs. Argonaut changed Yoshi into a reptile named Croc and released it on their own, but it was about a year after Mario 64. This was a frustrating move by Nintendo, but it was their speed at making and releasing Super Mario 64 that helped make it the first of its kind. One thing that Nintendo was able to do that Argonaut couldn't was make extremely fun and reliable gameplay that still holds up well to this day. The game sold nearly 12 million copies, making it the best-selling game on the Nintendo 64. It was also a high seller on another console, the DS. Nintendo remade Super Mario 64 for the DS and released it on November of 2004. This remake was very similar to the original, but it did have a few major improvements. One thing it saw was major graphical improvements in every category, like characters looking better and textures looking significantly nicer. It also added an additional 30 stars to make the experience a bit longer. It was interesting because in this game, you started as Yoshi and had to unlock Mario to use him. From there, you could also unlock Wario and of course Luigi, who is subject to rumors of being in Super Mario 64 on the N64, which we'll get into later. The DS adaptation added a minigame section to the castle, which was a great addition to the game that definitely adds a lot of playtime. My favorite minigame was always this one where you have to sort the good bombs from the bad bombs. I always sucked major balls at it, but I still liked it. A negative difference about the DS version is the controls.
I'm sure you all recognize this, but this is a DS. The nice thing about the Nintendo 64 controller was that the joystick allowed for thousands of possible angles you could move at, but for the DS, the D-pad only allowed for 8, making it a lot harder to move.
Mario's movement feels a lot more awkward because of this difference. When the angle isn't a problem, the movement actually feels a lot better than the original, but this is pretty rare. I personally prefer the DS version as it was one of the first games I've ever played, but I can understand why people usually prefer the N64 version. It also feels a little more official to play the original because it's the version that everyone speedruns with. Mario 64 has consistently had the biggest and most competitive speedrunning community ever, with a massive history of people minimizing as much as possible the amount of time it takes to beat the game. It has so many big and small glitches that make the speedruns even more interesting. Plus, people have so well perfected the game that each new world record is always a big event. If you want to learn more about the history of Super Mario 64 world records, check out Summoning Salt's videos about the different Mario 64 speedrunning categories. They're really interesting. These speedruns have led to keeping a thriving community of people who are still passionate about the game all these years later. With people still talking about the game, it's still discussed a ton in terms of its rumors and mysteries. An older and very famous mystery involves the statue in the back courtyard of the castle. Some believe that this plaque says L is real 2401 and think that it means Luigi is in the game because of it. I actually have a video debunking the mystery if you're interested, but in short, more than likely just says Eternal Star. Luigi was originally meant to be in the game though, so most people take that as the mystery being true. A more recent and possibly even more famous theory is that Super Mario 64 has an AI that slightly changes the game as you go through based on your actions, meaning it's personalized. Some people report having seen a floating Wario head in one of the game's locations and have used this image as proof of its existence. This Wario head is actually from a Mario 64 promotional video, not in the actual game. The personalization theory was popularized by this Super Mario 64 Iceberg video that discusses various secrets and rumors in Super Mario 64. But these last few topics have been talked about to death, so I don't feel the need to go over them too in depth, especially because I already talked about them in my other Super Mario 64 video.
But what hasn't been talked about to death is this website's amazing Super Mario 64 fun facts, such as nobody's been destroyed by an atomic bomb playing Super Mario 64, and Super Mario 64 can be completed in one sitting, but you have to remain seated for the duration of the gameplay. But that's for another video about Super Mario 64. Wait, no! Ah!